Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today's is a good one and it's valuable information. If you're looking to increase the number of fish that you're catching, you need to key in on isolated cover. I talked about a few weeks ago where you can identify big pre-spawn fish, and I gave out 7 or 8 different locations that I know if you key in on, you'll get your chance at a big fish. And then when I did that video, I said I'd talk about individual pieces of cover in specific videos or their own videos if that was something that the viewers wanted. The viewers have spoken. They want me to break down each of these pieces of cover. So today we're going to start with isolated cover. What does isolated cover mean? Well, guys, it's a piece of cover that is by itself. Meaning you could have an entire sand flat, you have one stump on that sand flat, and that stump will attract fish to it. You could have a giant weed flat, and amongst that weed flat, you have one little rock pile. Well, that rock pile is an isolated piece of cover amongst other cover, but because it's different, it attracts fish to it. So that's really the key when it comes to isolated cover. And I've got a bunch of examples here that I want to walk you through. Before I do that, I do want to remind you, if you're looking to support the channel, you can get some cool apparel in my YouTube store. So you can go to my homepage and click the tab that takes you to my store. You can go into the description and click the link. It'll take you to my store as well. A bunch of different designs. It's a good way to support the channel. And that leads us into talking about our isolated cover. All right, guys, so I'm going to talk just a little bit briefly about each of these different pieces of cover and show you a picture. Before I do get into that, though, I just want to remind you that it doesn't have to be a piece of cover on a bare bank or on a sand flat. It can be just a unique piece of structure amongst lots of other pieces of structure that are all the same. So again, if you've got a big stump field and then have a hole in the stump field, or you've got one clump of grass, that's the isolated piece of cover. It's that different piece of cover amongst nothing or amongst other cover that is all very much the same. The bass just get drawn to that piece of cover, and it's a great way to narrow down your search. So if you can start on these isolated pieces of cover, it gives you a very good target to cast at. So you're not out there just fan casting, you're fishing these key pieces of structure. I think that's some of the best advice I can give to tournament anglers, even fun fishermen. If you're willing to work and cover a lot of water, you can hit a lot of isolated pieces of cover. And I truly believe this is something that the best tournament anglers out there and the best anglers do to increase their success rate on the water. So some of the key pieces that I'm going to talk about. The first one here is a dock. So in this case, this is just a standalone dock. There's not another dock within a half mile of this one single dock. What that does is it creates a really good piece of cover for the fish to use almost any time of the year. In the pre-spawn, you've got fish that hold under docks because they hold warmth. You've got fish that hold under them that are staging to move into spawn in the back of the pocket. You've also got fish in the summertime that are going to be looking for the shade of the dock, so they're going to hang out under the dock. And you've got the same thing in the fall. If you've got fish that are looking to get out of the sun and use shade, or they're just looking for a piece of cover to ambush prey, a dock is a great thing. But it's so much better to target a standalone dock versus a row of 20 docks, because then at that point that fish could be under any of those 20 docks. In this case, you're better off looking for a standalone dock. So for me, if I'm running down the lake and I see a dock by itself, I will usually run in and hit it. It doesn't have to be a floating dock like this one. It could be a standalone dock. It could be a dock with wood posts, a dock with metal posts. Doesn't matter where you're at in the country. A dock by itself is a very high percentage target worth fishing. The next one that I've got here is just a rock, a big boulder on a bank, but it doesn't have to be a big boulder. In this case, you can see it's like a 45-degree bank that does have other rock on it, other hard bottom, but then you've got this giant boulder, and you can see the boulder run off into the water. It almost creates like a mini bluff in this boulder itself. And this is, if you know where this rock is at, you know that it holds fish. I'm not going to tell you where, but I can almost always count on it producing a nice tournament fish for me. But the rock itself acts as just a unique piece of structure that provides a little bit more verticalness that the fish can tuck up against. It provides a good ambush spot for fish to feed. Again, this is similar to a dock. In the springtime, a rock holds a bunch of heat. It's a really good pre-spawn place. It's a good place for a fish to build a bed next to. It's a good place for the fish in the summer to get out of the sun. They can get behind some of the crevices in the rock. But again, it doesn't have to be a big boulder. You know, with smallmouth, I can't tell you the number of times you find a basketball-sized rock on a sand flat, and you'll have a whole school of smallmouth that relate to that one rock. It just gives them something to hold to. I think it gives them the feeling of comfort of knowing where they're at. And it's just that little different piece of structure. It's the same theory if you're fishing smallmouth and you find boat tie-ups where people have got a buoy that they sink on a big cement block. A lot of times that cement block is just on a do-nothing bank, and therefore the fish hold to it because it gives them something to hold to. So don't ever overlook a single rock by itself. You're just looking for a different type of rock on the bank that it's on. So it could be a small rock on a sand flat. It could be a big rock, in this case, on a rock bank, but it's a different rock on that bank. So don't ever overlook a single isolated rock or rock pile or boulder. They are some of the absolute best things that you can fish year round. The next one that we've got here is a deep hole on a shallow flat. There's actually two holes. You can see here you've got a nice larger hole that's on a shallow sand flat, and then you've got even a smaller hole next to it. In both of these cases, you know, on this lake, that sand flat that you're looking at is probably about 3 to 4 feet. It's got some scattered grass on it, and then you have these holes that drop down to, both of them drop down to 10 to 14 feet of water. And it's just something that the fish will gravitate to. They like to go up and roam on that shallow flat, feed, chase bluegills, chase minnows. And then when they pull back, they use the hole as a little deeper water, and that's where they're going to sit. But because it's one confined little hole, you're able to fish those very thoroughly and key in on what would generally be a very large flat, key in on the sweet spot. I can't tell you the number of times I've found a deep hole on a shallow flat that has numbers of fish, and this is just a good example of one. And again, it's just another different type of isolated cover. The next one here is a small weed clump. This is an isolated top patch of topped out milfoil out in the middle of a deeper 8-foot flat. I don't know why it's there, but I can tell you that that little patch has provided me a lot of fish over the years. The shape of it changes a little bit, and it doesn't move from where it's at, but sometimes it's a little bigger, sometimes it's not even there. But that little patch provides a place for fish to gravitate to. And I can tell you, don't ever skip over an isolated weed clump, whether it's a small patch of tules or your buggy whips, whatever you like to call them. It could be a small patch of pads. It could be a small patch of weeds like this. Basically, it's just a small isolated patch of grass that provides the fish something to hold to. Again, in the summer months, it'll give the fish something to sit in and wait for an ambush spot. But really, it's great. Most of the time, you won't find a patch of grass like this one that is so by itself. But what you'll find is a larger, batch of pads or a large grass mat. And then off the edge of that, you might find some scattered little ones. A lot of times those scattered little ones that are by themselves are the ones you want to concentrate on, because you can fish those so much more thorough than you can, say, a 20-acre pad field. So there are fish in that 20-acre pad field too, but it's going to take you all day to maybe catch them versus concentrating on the smaller ones. And a lot of times I'll use those smaller ones as a good test. If you don't get bit in those smaller ones, I won't even fish the big field. I will move on. If I get bit in the smaller outside lane patches of pads or grass at that point, then I will move into the big one and see if I can catch, fish in the big grass mat as well. The next one here, we have just an isolated log. An isolated log is a great one too. You know, I can't tell you the number of times you can catch fish out of a log that's just by itself on a do-nothing bank. In fact, some of the best isolated logs I like to find are the ones that are just on a do-nothing straight bank that nobody ever would fish, because those single pieces of log or cover will attract fish that are using that giant do-nothing bank, because it's the only piece of cover around. It's one reason I tell people, like, if they're going to sink brush piles, they should probably sink them in areas that people aren't going to that look crummy, because they get less pressured and the fish that are in that area will gravitate to it because they don't have anything else to use. But you don't ever want to overlook an isolated piece of wood. That could be a laydown on the bank. It could be a stump that's out in the middle of a creek. It could be, in this case, this is just a single, a big tree that got caught up in the middle of this chute on a river. Doesn't really matter. You just don't want to overlook it because they provide really good places for fish to hold. And the last piece here that I want to show you is just the duck blind. Duck blinds are notorious for being great places to fish because they're almost like an isolated dock that's out in the middle of of a shallow flat. And again, this just provides the fish with a random piece of shade that gives them some cover to hold by. And duck blinds are known to have fish and bait fish gravitate to them. They're great areas to fish. I highly recommend never overlooking a duck blind. Just because the fish like to use them as much as the hunters do. But again here, all of these different pieces of isolated cover are just providing the fish a piece of cover to use to feed, to get out of the sunlight, to get out of, whatever conditions they're in, to absorb some warmth. They're the standalone piece that's in an area that really has nothing else the fish can use. So if the fish has nothing else to use, they're going to gravitate to what's there. I mean, it would be the same as you guys being out, say, in a big, hayfield. If you're looking to get out of the sun, where are you going to go? You're going to find the first tree you can find and go hang out in the shade. It's very similar for the bass. So that's isolated cover. I will assure you that if you start keying in on fishing high percentage spots like isolated cover, you're going to increase the number of fish that you catch. It's one of the number one things I can recommend. I realize not everyone has that potential. If you're fishing from shore, you don't necessarily have that potential to cover as much water, but you still can concentrate on moving from one place to the next. Yes, it definitely requires more effort, but that effort has rewards. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button and stay tuned for tomorrow's video.